Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to an episode of InRange. This is my Q&A for February. If it comes out in February, we'll be lucky. It might come out in March, but that's okay. I'm really excited because I've got a guest this month, Atun-Shei. I've recommended him on InRange before because, quite honestly, he does awesome work, and I think that our historical interests, while they're different in different parts of the region of the world, although some of our New Orleanian stuff converges, I think our perspective and approach to history is well aligned, and that makes it, I think, an interesting conversation. And I know my audience has really enjoyed watching a lot of your content, Atun-Shei, so I'm really happy to have you here.
Yeah, well, happy to be here.
Thank you. Oh, I've got a million questions as always. These are all from Patreon supporters, completely crowdfunded. No sponsors, no overlords, no gods, no masters. So thank you for keeping InRange alive. We're going to start with the questions because there's always too many. All right, here we go. Cameron W. What historical event had much greater effect than people give it credit? And what historical event had much smaller effect than people give it credit? These are hard questions.
Yeah, no, right off the bat with like a, oh shit,
Yeah, this is
I don't
this is
know.
how many angels dance on the head of a pin kind of stuff.
Yeah, precisely. You know, I mean, I've certainly, as far as, I mean, anybody who watches my stuff regularly will know probably my answer to this, but King Philip's War up in New England, in terms of American history, is quite possibly the most overlooked historical event. Because its implications were absolutely massive. For those who don't know, it was in 1675 and 1676. It was a conflict between the United English colonies of Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, and Connecticut, though Rhode Island kind of got in there in a way, and three Native American nations, the Wampanoag, the Nipmuc, and the Narragansett. Very complicated sort of Game of Thronesy political stuff going on. You know, everybody sort of people were working together and betraying one another and backstabbing, and it was a very messy, violent conflict. It was not cut and dry. It was the bloodiest war per capita in American history, and it really set the tone for how Anglo Americans would later expand into the West. And it really sort of the precedents that were set in the brutality of King Philip's War, you could pretty much see those echoes, you know, right up to Wounded Knee, and indeed, one could argue beyond. So that would certainly be my answer for underrated.
What about one that's a smaller effect than people give it credit for?
Oh God, I don't know. No, I mean, there's got to be one. Yeah, I mean, you know, shit. We talked about this in the sort of first part of this video. We've already shot a bunch of this that's going to go on my channel, but I think the American Revolution could fit under that category, in terms of, you know, I mean, it's sometimes talked about as a conservative revolution because generally the people who were in power in the colonies before the revolution were also in power in in, you know, the new United States after the colonies, and certainly in terms of how we identify as Americans, and certainly, you know, as somebody who, you know, I consider myself a pretty patriotic guy, and I think that when we're discussing, you know, American values and sort of the Enlightenment ideals upon which we have, you know, structured our society ostensibly, that was a huge deal, and yeah, and just in terms of how we see ourselves, but you know, in terms of things actually changing, and was it this whole like, you know, big seismic shift, like the way we often see it portrayed in movies and sort of more kind of old-fashioned sort of great man history? Not really.
My answers are going to be kind of more grandiose, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
I think that a lot of people do give this a lot of credit that it deserves, but I think it's forgotten about frequently when we walk about in our daily lives. In terms of a historical event that had much greater effect than people give it credit, I would say that would be the discovery of antibiotics.
Yeah.
It's something that I mean, I think some people do give it the credit it deserves, but in general, day to day, we don't think about it. And the
Yeah.
world before antibiotics was a scary ass
Yeah.
place.
It sucked. Yeah.
And the one that I think that gets that had a much smaller effect than people give it credit. This is going to cause some consternation. Was the lunar landing?
Oh
Neato,
yeah.
we got to a rock. Didn't really mean much.
Yeah. That's a good answer. That is a really good answer. Yeah, which, you know, and the Hans Zimmer orchestra that plays in my mind whenever I look at that footage is definitely, yeah, yeah. My first reaction was kind of be like, what do you mean? It was a great achievement, but yeah, it kind of was just sort of, oh well, we beat the Soviets.
It was a great achievement, and don't get me wrong, I love it. I think it's amazing
No,
seeing
no,
that
I know what
and
you
the
mean. Yeah.
but in the overall effect of how it affects us as humanity,
Yeah.
not really.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have a moon base yet. When we do have a moon base, then yeah, maybe I'll, we'll consider it being this big, spectacular thing. That is a really good answer. I wish I
But
thought
we
of
do have a
that.
space force. We have a space
That's
force.
true. We do have a space force, the brave men and women serving in the X-wings and Tie fighters currently. No, I don't know. But yeah, man, I personally can't wait for a moon base. Space
I want to go
tourism.
there. I
Oh
will be
yeah,
sad if
I'd
I
love
don't
to go
make it.
there.
If I don't make it, one of my hopes in life is that I
Yeah,
live long enough to be able to actually leave the Earth at least briefly. So
yeah, no.
I want to get to space.
No, mine too. Mine too. Yeah, and yeah, there's like fucking Tom Cruise, man. Have you heard about this? Like the new Mission Impossible movie. He's like he wants to film a scene in space. It's going to be like his new stunt, or it's like in one of the future
No,
Mission
I didn't.
Impossible movies. Yeah, it's like a whole thing, which my filmmaking partner Eduardo is really angry about because he had always wanted to shoot the first movie in space, and now Tom Cruise is probably going to do it.
Creepily, the first picture ever taken from space was on a V-2 rocket.
I thought you were going to say that the first picture taken from space was of Tom Cruise. No, that is
Maybe.
creepy. That is creepy. Though, yeah, it doesn't really surprise me that much. Okay.
Lane W. What is your take on the role of weapons and firearms in the history of civil rights? Or what sorts of changes over time do you see in their use within the civil rights movements in your knowledge areas? I know you're not a
Well,
gun guy,
that's
I get that, but it's more of a history question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's not. I'm not a gun guy. I'm just like I just never
I
really.
mean, not like this
Yeah,
gun guy,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly.
so
No, I mean,
yeah.
there was like a point in my early 20s where I was just like, man, I should like get into guns, but I couldn't afford it. And then, I just feel like the ship just kind of sailed.
Oh, it happens right now. You definitely can't afford it. The prices are the worst they've ever been in the history of
Yeah,
ever. But
yeah.
anyways,
No, so I've heard, yeah, from a few of my friends who are really into guns. But yeah, so yeah, honestly, I think this is a bit more of a Carl question, but it is kind of interesting because it's kind of like where do you draw the line, right? Because you could kind of make the argument that the vast majority of civil rights movements throughout history were did involve weapons, and it's kind of like where does civil rights movements end and revolts begin? And maybe that's just a semantic argument, but yeah, I mean, you could certainly view something like the Haitian Revolution to be a civil rights movement with weapons. Or as Anakin Skywalker might say, aggressive negotiations with a lightsaber. And yeah, I mean, it's. I think that. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, I guess, sort of where. And again, maybe it's just me kind of overanalyzing and getting maybe too categorical, but kind of yeah, where does civil rights end and where does armed conflict necessarily begin? I don't know. What do you think, Carl?
it's a broad and difficult question,
Yeah,
and I think I mean, obviously there are many civil rights movements. Sadly, where there's been a need for lots of civil rights movements throughout the history of humanity. When I
yeah,
think about this one in particular, to firearms, I tend to think about the United States when we're talking about from like 1800 on, right? So like
yeah.
I know you've done some work on the 1811 slave revolt,
Mm-hmm.
and when they were able to acquire some weapons out of the arsenal there. But back then, when you go to 1811, the ability for an individual to use one firearm effectively wasn't very real.
Yeah.
The guns back then, in their guise and the technology, didn't really empower the individual like, say, a modern gun does. So it changes the paradigm and the discussion. And that's something a video I wanted to talk about actually was the use of the firearms that they were able to acquire in that revolt and how it didn't necessarily help them, sadly.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that actually. Yeah, no, yes, sadly did not really help. I mean, it was I mean, yeah, primarily the weapons that they carried before, yeah, before they were able to get their hands on a lot of firearms, and they did not get a lot of firearms considering their numbers. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of them, and there were just not that many guns to go around. But yeah, I mean, machetes, cane knives, nasty rusty farm implements, not something you want to get stabbed with. But yeah, I mean, and it is kind of interesting how limited firearm use was in that revolt, because like certainly the militia, both the American militia and the sort of impromptu makeshift plantation owner militia that eventually dispersed the revolt. They both used firearms, much more so than the rebels did, though really only the planters used them effectively. The American militia was, we think, confounded and outmaneuvered by the rebels, probably for precisely that reason. Probably because the rebels did have warriors with them, recent arrivals from West Africa who had fought in wars and who were used to combating better armed foes. And specifically, I'm referring to the failed ambush that Wade Hampton, the leader of the American militia, tried to make on the rebel encampment in what is today Kenner, Louisiana. And yeah, the rebels fooled the Americans into thinking that they were encamped in a certain place, and they were not. They were night marching. They were a long ways away. And sort of, were able to, just kind of to fool them into wasting their time, wasting their resources, so that they couldn't catch up with them. And in terms of kind of the final sort of Spartacus-like battle that where the rebels were eventually defeated, there was heavy rain, conditions were not good. And the rebels were heavily outgunned. The planter militia also had dogs as well, which is another element that I'm sure played a big part in just creating chaos and just creating the conditions for the rebels to rout. So yeah, so it is certainly interesting. I mean, it's sort of very basic kind of tactical stuff, but generally, if you have more firearms than your opponent does in even a small scale battle like that, you're going to want to keep your distance, and just sort of rain lead from afar, which is what Manuel Andry, the leader of the planter militia, and his fellows did to great effect. But yeah, I mean, pretty much kind of once the rebel army was split up, they could just, then use their dogs to track down the individual little pockets. And from there, it was pretty much just a mopping up operation for the powers that be. But yeah, I mean, the two confirmed kills that the rebels did have were not with firearms; they were with knives and axes. So pretty nasty stuff. And if anybody watching has seen my video on the 1811 slave revolt, you'll know about this story. It's a great story. I mean, it's a man gets brutally murdered, but it is kind of funny. There was this guy, this plantation owner who refused to flee ahead of the rebel advance, and it was early in the morning. He said, I'm not leaving my home. I'm going to stay here and fight. And so he grabbed his gun and he sat on his porch on the second floor. A lot of those plantation houses had sort of the big sort of second story porch, right? And he was just waiting for him to come. He saw them come along the river and started shooting at them and didn't really hit anything. And this guy named Cook, this one rebel leader, just sort of snuck around the back of the house, kicked the door in, walked right up the stairs while the guy was still shooting away, and came up behind him and chopped his head off with an axe. So it's not necessarily more firepower. It doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily, he didn't get the best of that one. But there is sort of an interesting legend surrounding that killing, which is that Cook then saw this particular plantation owner's slave boy, who he kept on a leash, and he he didn't say a word. He just handed him the axe, and then the kid butchered his master's body with it. Obviously, it's one of those things where might be apocryphal, but damn, it's just delicious. What a great story.
Yeah, no, it is. And when I think about this, it's like It's sad to say, but in a world where you're not the one that holds the power, and the opposition is willing to use violence, not being able to defend yourself puts you in a very precarious situation. And so, when I look at much more recent civil rights movements, especially the most famous of the two from recent history, of course, you have Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Malcolm X being very much a much more obvious example of someone who was promoting the idea of self-defense with
Yeah.
firearms. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that while Martin Luther King Jr. was giving the speeches that he did, and for obviously good reasons and with noble cause, there were lots of people with guns around him to defend him. That's not necessarily talked about, but I think it's also a very real way to look at the world, that he realized that if he didn't have that, he would have probably been killed sooner than he was.
Yeah.
So it's sad that the world works that way, but in a world awash with firearms, especially the United States, not having them, in my opinion, this is a political take, but not having them means that, or being prevented from being allowed to have them while the others are not prevented, puts you in a very serious power vacuum.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it is. Again, it is unfortunate, and and I'm generally, I don't know if this is sort of a political take or I don't know if this is a political take or sort of a philosophical one, but I'm kind of generally of the opinion that that violence is just not an appropriate or constructive response almost ever. You could point to very extreme circumstances, and people often do in this kind of discussion. It's just like, oh, well, what if somebody was trying to murder one of your family members, and it's like, well, yes, of course, I would rip them fucking limb from limb, but is that the context in which most violence is committed? No, and before we started recording, we kind of talked about this, Carl, about like Old West shootouts, and it wasn't, oh my God, someone's trying to murder my son. It's you owe me $12, you son of a bitch. It's just most of these killings, most of this violence is just done for the stupidest reasons. And yeah, I mean, in so many of these bar fights and, even like high society 18th century duels, it's like, my horse is faster than yours. How dare you? It's just that these killings did not need to happen, and even in historically, when that sort of thing, when it wasn't conceivable that Vikings would, kick down the door and, try to, murder you and your family. Even in those extreme sort of self-defense scenarios, the amount of violence that's committed for just utterly stupid reasons is going to far outnumber the violence that's like, oh my God, this is necessary to defend myself. So yeah, I'm generally a up to the point of turn the other cheek kind of guy. But yeah, I would 100% agree that, yeah, when you have, when firearms are just the thing to use, you are going to be at a disadvantage, and you're not going to be, sort of self-sufficient necessarily in a world where, firearm defense is sometimes necessary. You are going to be at a disadvantage if you don't have a firearm. And that message was not sponsored by any gun company, but
No, totally. And that's one of the things that's difficult when we're talking about the topics I deal with, especially with firearms and such, is that, we talked about this in the other video, which is going to be on your channel, but it's like frequently it is exciting to read about these things in battles. And it's definitely something that affects the human psyche in a way that we're drawn to it. It's sad that the world is the way it is. It just is. Violence should be the last resort, and it shouldn't be. You should not be the one instigating it, right? So, if in a world that contains violence, it's unfortunately something you can't avoid. Well, you can try to avoid the best you can, but sometimes when it's kicking in your door, you don't have a choice. It is the last resort, and there's never a time that violence is something that should be glorified. It's always a terrible event.
Yeah, precisely, and I think. Yeah, and this is certainly sort of an approach. I mean, that you have here, Carl. I did see your hilarious video about that one book, that children's book.
Yeah, Colonel Grossman's book.
Colonel Grossman's book.
Colonel Grossman, yeah.
And yeah, that is yeah, and I mean, just that sort of thing is really pretty emblematic of this this unfortunate kind of mentality that a lot of us have, especially in America. We all think we're Rambo. We all think we're Bravehearts. Sorry to break it to you. You're not. You're not. You're not as hard as you think you are. And if you try to like engage in violence, unless it is strictly absolutely necessary, nothing good will come of that. That's I do think, as for specifically kind of bring it back to the question, firearms with civil rights. Yeah, I mean, I think there's. Look, if you're somebody like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, and you're saying, you're trying to start something, you're saying things that a lot of people are going to try to kill you for, then you certainly need to be prepared for that eventuality. I generally think that I guess sort of on that same vein, when even just using firearms or weapons, just violence, I guess. It's beyond firearms. This is a historical thing that goes back to, clubs and stones. If you're using violence to achieve some political or social end, good luck. Historically, you don't have a great track record. Certainly it is kind of unfortunate that, you need to be able to defend yourself, in the very remote and unlikely event that something like that happens. Just don't get like just don't delude yourself into thinking that you're Rambo, because, you ain't.
Because then you get philosophies like killology.
Exactly. Precisely. Yeah. But sorry, I don't mean to like ramble or whatever on about.
No, not at all.
About this stuff.
That's what my Q&As are.
It is much more of a you question than it is a me question.
No, it's great. So now we're switching gears hard.
Okay.
Tim K, do you think a mass switch away from an advertisement-based revenue stream in favor of direct viewer support would help get rid of low-effort clickbait on YouTube? Essentially, does advertising change the type of content that exists? You want me to go first? Because I have a...
Please do. I think I know what I want to say, but I am curious to hear your take.
I am not saying that people shouldn't be using advertising. I don't. I'm completely crowdsourced, but that's a choice on my own accord. I do think that advertising and using advertising as a tool for who can be monetized and who cannot be monetized based on what they're saying is therefore a tool of control and has the potentiality and is currently having a cooling effect on the type of content that's being created, as well as the discussions that are being allowed to be had. And I do think that it does frequently cause, not everyone, because some people are different than others, but I do think a lot of the clickbait and the kind of stuff that succeeds on YouTube as a platform succeeds because it's designed to be that clickbait for those ad dollars. So while not everyone using advertising is having that is allowing that negative effect to be upon them, I think that it does create a general negative effect overall. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that there's I think very sort of generally that is true. There's it is weird though. The algorithm is it's like a worm from Tremors, right? It's just it can't see. It has there's no working brain. It just burrows and it eats, and the YouTube algorithm just eats money. That's like all it wants is, that's how YouTube operates. It's just advertising money, and that's basically what the algorithm wants, is to make Google advertising money. That said, there are my most popular video, really the only video of mine that's gone significantly viral, my Nazi roommate video, is actually not just demonetized. I didn't even bother to monetize it because I just knew it would get demonetized. So I was like, what's the point? That video exploded. It is interesting, and I suppose you could always find sort of examples, exceptions to the rule, right? As we discussed in the last video, I am a hypocrite, and I totally take that Google money, that blood money. And it's, and I don't have a good reason for it other than the fact that, I want it, and it does help. my productions are generally like pretty expensive, and, and a lot of the money that I make just goes straight back into my videos. I mean, I'm making, this video right now. It's basically a 30-minute television pilot, and, I've spent thousands of dollars on it. So, it definitely does help. So as far as kind of, as far as though, kind of going back to the question, like, will a move away from advertisement-based, entertainment or video content like help? Undoubtedly. Will it, the trouble, and you've talked about this, Carl, is like, the trouble is that YouTube is the only game in town, is that, like, if you want to get seen, you have, if you want to, like, just be a somebody who is, like, making entertainment or educational videos or whatever the case might be to an online audience, you're just kind of stuck with YouTube for now. I think that, and I think that if that sort of moving away from the advertisement based sort of business model that YouTube has, I think that'd be a great thing. But I think the sort of more dramatic and decisive solution would be to trust bust Google. Like, I don't think Google should be nationalized. That sounds like, death by fire or death by sword, But I do think that it needs to be trust busted, that it just needs to be a bunch of different companies and there needs to be alternatives, And I think a lot of YouTubers and online entertainers or educators or whatever you want to call it recognize that. And there are some alternatives that are coming up. I mean, there's I'm not part of it, but oh shit! Actually, I had to respond to an email about this. I totally forgot about that. It was like 2 weeks ago. But the Armchair Historian is a YouTuber who has his own platform. Where basically people are uploading videos that aren't gonna be censored by YouTube. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of unfortunate. I think it's also just kind of important to understand in this discussion that it isn't necessarily, that it isn't people over at Google, wringing their hands and twirling their mustaches and going, no, we will censor everyone. Like, no, they're just trying to make the most amount of money possible. And for whatever reason, their algorithm has determined that, quote unquote, controversial things like firearms videos, like LGBT videos, that kind of stuff is just not good for business. Yeah, that sucks, and we should change it. Yeah, and of course, I'm sure I come across like a regular old Thomas Jefferson talking about this stuff while still taking that sweet Google money. But, it's without a doubt broken. So, yeah.
Well, I would counter that my own views in one way. I think the one thing the advertising money can do is that until you have an audience sufficiently large enough to be supported by a crowd, like via Patreon, you can't even get started. So it does also enable startups to happen. Like, it's not wholly a negative. What's wholly a negative is when the algorithm uses it to force milquetoast content. But without it, some people would have never got started, and that would have been a loss too. So it's not a binary statement.
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. No, but I think we're like completely on the same page, Carl, as far as like as kind of what the problem is with YouTube. I mean, it's shit, man. It is so amazing how much this website has just taken over people's audio-visual consumption. And, I've talked about this in videos. You've talked about this in videos. I mean, I talk to friends and I say, I'm a movie nerd. Talk to other friends who are movie nerds. Like, what movies have you watched recently? It's like, I don't know. Pretty much just YouTube videos. I really haven't been watching many movies recently. And that's becoming more and more and more common, and people are, I mean, even stuff like Netflix or Amazon Prime, like, that stuff is not free. YouTube is. So, we have a different reality and we've got to adapt to it. But yeah, I mean, certainly I think those changes need to come from the top down. It does kind of grind my gears when you see these platitudes from YouTube and from Google about, which are not, unwelcome platitudes, but, like making it easier for creators, or, we have, here are some, some black creators or some gay creators to check out, and they'll sort of push the stuff. And then, and I mean, listen, that's good. Like, they should be doing that. Like, the advantages of doing that are better than the disadvantages. But I think everybody can kind of see it for the corporate ploy that it is. And the fact is, the algorithm really isn't, they're not backing those words up with action, which is unfortunate, and I think it's good that we like talk about this stuff, like as YouTubers, I think it's important that we sort of call attention to this stuff, and we also have. It amazes me as well how like technologically literate YouTube viewers are, at least in the comments section. A lot of people are talking about the algorithm and engagement. I mean, people know how it works, and these problems are very evident to everybody. And yeah, I think it's just a question of, something's got to be done. And yeah, in my opinion, something, pretty dramatic that will just kind of spread the wealth around and spread the, oh God, I said spread the wealth around as Karl Marx is going to come around and, oh no, Bernie, what are you doing here? No, but yeah, I don't know. It's a crazy world we live in, and I don't think any of us, certainly who are sort of, I mean, I certainly never thought that these would be the problems that I was dealing with as like a filmmaker, as a documentarian, I don't know.
I'm one of those early like hacker nerds, and so when I see the internet, I remember that to me, I love YouTube. I think people think that I have some sort of like bone to pick, and I do because I don't like where it's going. But I love what it represents and what it's been. So I think it's done amazing things, and I think it can continue to do amazing things.
Totally.
But what I don't want to see is I don't want to see us lose the promise of what the internet was promised to be.
Yes.
For just a small corporate oligarchy.
Yeah,
and that's
precisely.
What's happening, and that's what my problem is.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be, this egalitarian thing, this democratization of entertainment and of the exchange of ideas, and I think I mean shit, it's kind of starting with in the early 2010s, I mean certainly Edward Snowden, just like fucking blew the lid off of so much malfeasance from the sort of federal bureaucratic end, and now kind of more and more we're seeing censorship and malfeasance from kind of the corporate private end, and yeah, there's no kind of easy solution to this stuff. But yeah, I mean the fact that all of this money and all of this power is just being consolidated in in the pockets of so few people. I mean, it's like it's just incredibly sad and incredibly discouraging. I don't want to end on a downer. I feel like I've been talking about all this depressing stuff.
No. I think it's
on our other video, guys, we were like, we were like talking about, the food of New Orleans and all this like happy stuff, and now I've just been talking about like, so slavery, and sometimes you have to defend yourself with a gun and do violence, and the world is a shitty place. I'm sorry, it's just like turning so depressing.
Well, you know what this is? These are the questions that were submitted via my Patreon, so maybe yours have a different flavor.
Maybe.
I don't know what to say to that.
No, I'm sorry. I'll try to be snappier too, because I'm
not at all.
I just tend to ramble, and this is why I want to have a script. In my videos, I like almost always have a script, because I just tend to just fucking.
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
It just boils down to when too much power is aggregated in any one place, it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And this is no different if it's a corporation, a government, a religion. It doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
If one of them is out of balance, you got a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Corey Zozac. Are there any comments that were not quite right to use in an episode of Checkmate Lincolnites, but stuck with you or is worth mentioning? So I guess something that you wanted to say in a Checkmate Lincolnites, or a topic that you just decided not to go with.
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, I think, there are more Checkmate Lincolnites episodes to come, and there will be more, misunderstandings about the Civil War that hopefully will be clarified. And there's definitely more material to tackle. I think there are certain topics that I will never address in that series, frankly, because they're too ridiculous, and nobody who I'm actually can reach believes that stuff. Stuff like slaves were happy and treated well, which I kind of made a joke about in one recent episode, and basically saying I will never do that. Because there sort of comes a point where, I mean, it's just so stupid. It's just not even worth addressing. And if I did address it, then I fear that it would just become yet another, tune in and agree with everything being said type of program. Which, I'll admit, I should have been more conscious about in especially like the first 2 episodes of that series. Which, kind of looking back on now, just kind of come across as like a fuck you to my critics and aren't terribly constructive and educational. I mean, it's not, I didn't say anything wrong in those episodes. I just don't think my attitude was like correct. You should always come at it from a place of trying to educate and trying to enlighten, not as like hey, fuck you. It's just like, it's not constructive. But you learn. You learn as you do. I mean, when I made those episodes, I had 1,000 and 3,000 subscribers, something like that. So you just don't know. That sort of, and then when you have hundreds of thousands, then it's like, wow, fuck, I actually have a fair amount of power here, although not nearly as much power as the audience does. There are those topics, and I really, and that's why I've sort of slowly come to the realization that after Checkmate Lincolnites ends, I'm not going to do another thing like that, another kind of myth-busting thing, because I do think there is this danger of it just turning into, the liberal listening to NPR or the conservative watching Fox News, just like tell me things I agree with, confirm my biases, and I love I don't want it to become that thing maybe any more than it already is, and I don't ever want to be that guy. So there's sort of that aspect of it as well. As far as comments, I mean, there are some crazy ones, man, and some of them, and it's always, and we were talking about trying to, make this more upbeat, and I keep giving depressing answers, but, honestly, with a lot of these comments, it's just not, and I know I pick like funny ones for the show, but reading a lot of them is just, it's not funny, it's just kind of depressing. It's like, wow, well, people actually believe this stuff, and like, oh, God, in the video over on my channel, we were talking about comparing YouTube comments to bathroom stall graffiti, and it is very much kind of comes from the same place. And yeah, like a lot of that stuff, I mean, there's a reason I don't really read comments anymore. It's just because, like, if somebody's, you're an asshole. Okay. Another depressing.
Yeah, the issue, the one thing
Atun-Shei.
that I really have a problem with sometimes in the comments, especially with some of the topics that I deal with, and I think you do too, is I don't necessarily want people, I don't really like it when there's like really bad misinformation being distributed through my content. Like,
Yes.
so people come to this, and then there's comments. One example in firearms world, which is a really bad one, that seems to never die, is this idea that treating a puncture wound or gunshot wound with a tampon is a good idea. Like, this is just an example. It's not a good idea. It's not a medically sound idea. It's a terrible idea. But a lot of the prepper community, or some of the prepper community, think it's a good idea. And so you put up a video about some sort of medical thing, which is actually legitimate, about tourniquets or bandages or whatever. And then there's this comment thread about, this guy's an idiot. That stuff costs money. Just go buy a box of tampons. I don't want that there. That's something I have a hard time with. And that's dangerous. And it's like, but then you'd have to like walk into that cesspool to deal with it. And it's an interesting problem.
That's the thing. It's kind of a lose-lose. And I mean, I do have like friends who do YouTube, or like, colleagues, whatever you want to call them, acquaintances, who do that, who like very, I mean, I don't know, do you moderate your comment section, Carl? Like, do you
I
read
watch them
most
for
of your
that
comments?
kind of stuff. I don't necessarily want that side of stuff being propagated through my content. Yes.
Exactly. And that stuff is like dangerous, and it is kind of one or the other. Like, either you read most of the comments and moderate it to get rid of that information, or you just read none of them and spare yourself just the fucking like, anguish of like getting into the stupidity. And then, but potentially at the same time, kind of allow misinformation to spread. I mean, I think there's like, it is kind of a double-edged sword. I think there is kind of an argument to be made that like even if someone is spreading misinformation, if they're sort of, if nobody's really reading the comment, if it's just like super far down and nobody's bothering with it, whatever. But yeah, I mean, certainly, if I kind of went onto a video and the top comment was, use tampons pee on a tampon and shove it in a bullet wound, then I would remove the comment, probably ban the guy. But I don't know. It's a delicate balance for sure. Yeah, I mean, you generally kind of talk to, and honestly, that's sort of been pretty refreshing about our conversation, Carl. We've been talking for a few hours now, and mostly when I talk to other YouTubers, like one of the first topics is comments, and I think this is the first time we've really gotten into it in depth. And I think that kind of goes to show, just how much power, audiences have. Is that I find it very telling that when YouTubers get together, it's just like, oh, crazy comments, let's talk about them. It's like, again, it's like sort of the people who say, haha, I'm above it all, are like clearly, just insecure about the fact that, the other day they read a comment that ruined their afternoon. I feel like the fact that YouTubers talk a lot about comments just kind of goes to show how the power dynamic between YouTubers and their audience is just so unbelievably slanted in favor of the audience. Because it is social media, right? It is so interactive. And I mean, my kind of solution to it is just completely step back. Like I was on Twitter for a while, like pretty active on Twitter, and my channel blew up. So I got a bunch of new Twitter followers, and it was just like, fucking dopamine. It was a dopamine factory, it was just like, oh, I haven't put out a video for a while. I'll make a pithy tweet and get all sorts of love, but that shit is so unhealthy. So I don't want to be that guy, and I don't want to deal with that stuff. I don't want to deal with either the hate or the flattery, because the flattery is that isn't constructive either, because that's not telling you what you're doing wrong.
Oh, it's just as dangerous in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to deal with that. So I've just completely taken a step back and just kind of focused on the work, and just sort of the kind of being, I don't want to be a YouTube internet personality. I want to be a mechanic who's, all right, so how's this going to cut together? How is this piece of, of writing going to, what's this script going to look like? I want to be the technician, not, the celebrity, even though, we're celebrities in the tiniest possible way. I don't know. Does that make sense? I'm rambling again.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Everyone's a celebrity in the Warholian sense of the word, right?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
This is a perfect question. Exactly. This dovetails directly in what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Philip W. Is there, for historical content and videos, is there a research time to video length ratio that's acceptable? So, for example, 20 hours of research for a 10-minute video? Like, do you try to, like... Because this stuff you can go on forever. It's all a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So where do you have to, like, call it?
This stuff could go on forever. I think... and then, later, months after you publish the video, you're like, fuck, I didn't address that thing, and I could have gone so much deeper, and that sort of stuff. It's different. And to be honest, I don't really time it out. Usually the writing and the research is the longest part of the process for me. And generally, once I have kind of the footage in the can, I edit pretty quickly. Yeah, so, and it also really kind of depends on the topic. Like, is it something that that is where there's academic literature that's readily available, or is it something, or something more obscure, something that doesn't necessarily have a lot of literature on it, something that you kind of need to do your own sort of digging about. It really, really kind of depends. And also sources. Like, is it something that is covered pretty comprehensively in, 2 or 3 sources that you can kind of base most of your video on? Or is it something that you got to look at 10 things, and sort of compile bits and pieces from each of them? I mean, it's certainly, and another thing we were kind of talking about is we're both sort of self-taught, historians and presenters. So yeah, and a lot of it is also just a continuous kind of learning experience, you know. And yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean that's definitely kind of the best. One of the best parts of the job for me is research. You know, I've always loved it.
I've said this a lot with my audience. It's like, so I do a lot of different variety of different topics and content. But when it comes to the historical videos, those are the ones that are always the most disproportionate, not necessarily in a bad way, but
Yeah,
disproportionate
yeah,
of
yeah.
effort to actual time of runtime of the content. So a lot of these videos will be 20 hours or more of content or
Yeah.
of research or work. And then the video, I do the video and I'm like, damn, this video is 8 minutes long.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's
exactly.
and it doesn't necessarily reflect, but when I'm doing something that's historically based, I feel like if I don't do that, I'm doing a disservice. Like I don't want to
Yeah,
miss. We all make mistakes. It's impossible not to.
yeah, of
But
course,
putting
yeah.
out, it doesn't matter if the 8 minute video's 8 minutes, as long as it's correct, and that's what
Yes.
bothers me the most.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, there are definitely videos that I'm otherwise like very proud of, where I just got something really stupid wrong, and you know, I always issue corrections and stuff like that, but it's always like, you know, you can never quite look at it the same way again. Yeah, and but that's good. I mean, that's how you got to approach it as an educator. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, I do consider myself, yeah, like a documentarian, sort of an entertainer first, and that's certainly kind of where my training lies. But at the same time, you know, it's like the actual purpose of most of my channel is to educate. So yeah, I mean, of course, like, and if I ever felt that a video was that like the sort of main thrust of a video was wrong, or if I had gotten things so wrong that just the video I felt was a piece of misinformation, then I would take it down unquestionably. Thankfully, that hasn't happened, but it probably will. And
It has to me.
you
I've
know,
I've pulled a few down. They were
oh really?
specifically gun related, but I made a couple mistakes in the
Do,
discussion that were wrong enough that I just pulled them down.
Yeah, yeah. Do you so as far as like research for your gun videos, I mean, you do sometimes like, you know, I've seen your like you know, a lot of your historical firearm stuff, and you're definitely, you know, throwing down some knowledge in that. So I imagine that takes a lot of research. But do you generally like the more kind of old west vignettes? Do they require more research than the gun videos, or vice versa?
They do, because the gun
No.
videos are frequently things that have aggregated over a long duration of time, being part of that world and going to
Totally.
competitions and just having an interest that's been around for a long time. But then when I stumble
Yeah.
upon some historical topic that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is something that's been underrepresented.
Yeah.
That it's underrepresented because the reason I stumble upon it, and if I'm stumbling upon it and it's a surprise to me, it's definitely going to be a surprise to most people. So that actually lands up taking more effort, because I want to find out, is this even real? Is this thing I stumbled upon something that's actually worth talking about? And then when typically speaking, sadly, when I start digging into it, I find out it's actually worse than what I first thought it was,
Yeah.
which is kind of sad, but the truth. But yeah, so
Yeah.
no,
Yeah. Yeah.
typically it's the firearm stuff, kind of a wash in it, and therefore it's just a general baseline knowledge makes it easier, although there's research there too. But the historical
Yeah.
stuff's different, and it has more culture. I frequently has more cultural and sociological impact than necessarily when did they chamber this gun in a different cartridge or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Although, you know, I mean, as we've discussed, you know, here, and I mean, it's there is, yeah, there are sort of sociological and political sort of aspects to firearm history as well. I mean, big time. You
Oh
know, I
yeah.
mean, especially here. You know, I mean, it's like where it is such a you know a big part of our culture and our way of life. You know, and God, I'm sorry, I sounded like a you know 1960s Southern politician. Our culture and our way of life, but no, it is. I mean, it is a part of you know not in like a weird creepy way. It just is like American culture is like very inextricably tied with firearms. You know, and in a way that it isn't in a lot of other places. And so yeah, when you're talking about sort of yeah history of Old West firearms, or you know, I mean even something like you know far back with how flintlocks were used in you know in the American frontier, kind of further to the east, or you know in the Caribbean, you know, in sort of the pirate days. Yeah, I mean there are for sure sort of social, economic, historical, cultural, ethnic elements that are you know also just as interesting as sort of the history of the firearm itself. You know, and And yeah, I mean, a lot of those firearms, in the videos that I've seen of yours, that do, yeah, a lot of your videos that do talk about sort of the history of firearm, it is sort of like the gun itself is like telling a story. Like the history of the gun tells a story, which yeah, I mean, is I think a big reason. Yeah, I mean, it's just I think that the sort of, and it's not just sort of weapons necessarily. It's a lot of different objects and pieces of technology that do that. But obviously, my inner 9-year-old just wants to hear about the guns.
No, it's true.
I don't want to hear about the history of a loom. Give me a fucking I don't know, but yeah, it's fascinating stuff. It really is. All right,
So
what's next?
we touched on this one on your copy of the video or your version of the Q&A, but here's this kind of little different. Matthew J. This is a food one finally. Cajun versus Creole. Which side does more iconic New Orleans food originate with?
Well, yeah, Creole. And because Cajun, so a lot of people sort of who aren't terribly familiar with South Louisiana don't quite realize that sort of Cajun culture, Cajun food, whatever. It's not really, doesn't really have much to do with New Orleans at all. I mean, it's kind of centered around Lafayette and sort of the swamps to the west and the south. It's not really a New Orleans thing. So when you're specifically talking about, okay, you're coming to Orleans Parish, you're visiting the city, you're in the French Quarter, whatever, the vast majority of stuff that you are going to, the vast majority of sort of the culture that you're going to be absorbing and the food you're going to be eating is going to be, Creole based at least. That's not to say you can't get, boudin balls in the grocery store, but, well, I suppose we should sort of clarify exactly. A lot of people probably don't know sort of the basic difference between Cajun
That's a good
and Creole.
point. Yeah, a lot of people don't know there's a difference.
But yeah, so just kind of put very simply, Creole, the original sort of etymology, just means of the colonies. So essentially, what being a Creole meant was that you were born in Louisiana. Whether you're sort of a Frenchman or a Spaniard or whatever. It means you originated in colonial Louisiana, and it was kind of a way to differentiate the Creoles with like the Anglos, with the Kaintucks, the Americans who came down after the Louisiana Purchase. Then, sort of a little bit later, Creole, the word kind of took on a different meaning, came to refer specifically to the mixed race free people of color in New Orleans in the early 19th century, and then it kind of sort of even after emancipation, kind of referred to that sort of group of people, sort of that some historians call the Afro-Creole elite, sort of the upper middle class, free people of color of, in particular, the Treme neighborhood. Now it just kind of means you're from Louisiana, pretty much. But Cajun, sort
or
of
you're a tomato because there's Creole tomato season.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So now Cajuns, that they originally come from Acadia in Canada. So when the British took over, kicked out the Acadians, and they went to Louisiana. They're transplanted Canadians. And incidentally, the founder of the city, Bienville, was also he was born in Quebec City. I mean, it's all sort of French Canadian stuff. And in a weird kind of connection between sort of two of my main historical interests, his brother Iberville he fought in King William's War against Benjamin Church, who was the hero of King Philip's War in Massachusetts. So, there you go. Atun-Shei's historical interests, they all come around. It's all connected, man. Time is a flat circle.
Yeah, but simply put, from a food, that is perfect. But the reality is the elevator pitch is that Cajun food is spicier and caught somewhere in the swamp and then turned into something to eat. Yeah. Creole food is much more erudite and urban or city.
Yes,
much more
exactly.
like fancy and French.
Yeah, precisely. And Cajun food, they'll eat fucking anything. They're like sharks. Yeah, they'll.
That's one of my favorite. One of my favorite examples of this, and I love this kind of history too. Actually, food history is really interesting to me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is Chef Prudhomme, K-Paul. K-Paul's recently closed because of COVID, which I guess is gone. But Chef Prudhomme was he's a Cajun, and he came into work at Commander's Palace, and it was kind of, I guess, controversial hiring him because you don't hire Cajun chefs at
For Creole
Commander's
food,
Palace.
yeah.
We're a
Yeah,
Creole
yeah, yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
brought in a lot of really interesting cooking ideas and was the progenitor of blackened redfish, and a lot of the Cajun influence in what is now in New Orleans food came from Chef Prudhomme, and I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, man. I would hope that we're sort of past that kind of snobbery, but it is uptown, so
Well, I think Chef Prudhomme got hired in Commander's Palace in the early '80s. It was quite a long
Oh,
time
really?
ago
Was
now.
that long ago? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think so. So things have changed a little since then. But
Yeah, yeah.
for you specifically, have you ever heard the story about the devil coming to Ipswich, Massachusetts, and leaving a hoof print?
Yes, I have, and it absolutely happened. I believe it. Yeah. So it just goes to show that you always need to be on your guard against the machinations of the devil. Yeah, and keep God's laws and commandments and resist the intrigues of Roman popery. Of course.
Yeah, and if your milk spoils too quickly,
No.
You might have a witch.
Yes, exactly. No, yes, I have heard that story, and I've been to Ipswich many times. There's a great the cemetery in Ipswich is really cool. Anybody who's in the North Shore of Massachusetts will probably just kind of visited there. It's on a main road, and it's built on a hillside, and it's just like there's really steep hill, dramatic hillside with these old, Puritan gravestones and stuff. And there's a wonderful meadery right across the street.
Ooh,
The 1634
nice.
meadery, which has a mead called the Devil's Footprint, which is delicious. So I recommend if you're in the area, you check them out. Yeah, I mean, as you know, Carl, I'm one of the things that fascinates me the most is weird 17th century New England folk tales and folk magic and that kind of stuff. We were kind of talking about again before we were recording about sort of kind of the great storytelling tradition of the Old West and how that has such a wonderful sort of unique kind of voice, it sort of feels like kind of an old timer telling you, about the story of the great gunfighter and stuff. And it's very similar for me for 17th century folklore. It has such it's just so fucking earthy and, it just tastes great. There's just something about it that is so, just the bizarre way they saw the world and the wonderful kind of superstitions. I mean, they weren't that wonderful because they got a lot of people killed, but they just to read about them are just absolutely fascinating. And I just love, especially, for those of you who don't know, I do these videos. I do a lot of 17th century stuff. I'm primarily known for Civil War stuff, but probably kind of on aggregate, the most stuff that I do is like 17th century New England history. And I have this character called the Witchfinder General who reacts to, who is a 17th century witch hunter who reacts to modern things, pretty much, in a historically accurate 17th century English accent. In early modern English, a lot of his dialogue is taken directly from witch hunting manuals and stuff, and he reacts to, Reddit and Fox News and stuff. And yeah, just reading a lot of these manuals, reading a lot of these treatises, and, you have people saying stuff like, the devils with names no mortal can invent, like Greedagut, Grizzle, and the like. It's like, who came up with this shit? It's just so fascinating. Yeah, the imaginations of those people. Really quite wonderful.
To be honest with you, those are my favorite videos of yours. The Witchfinder
yeah, I would say they're
General
my
is
favorite videos
absolute
of mine
brilliance.
too. Yeah.
Considering that's an interest. Are you ever going to do a video about the movie The Witch?
Possibly. I'm not sure that I would have that much to say about it other than it's really good. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of that director, Robert Eggers. He made another movie called The Lighthouse, which I think is even better than The Witch.
I haven't seen it. I've heard that I need to see it.
Oh man, it's so good. It's so good. Yeah, so I would certainly consider it. But yeah, I don't like to make videos unless I have something to say. And currently I don't really think I would have much to say about The Witch other than I really love it. It's great. It's scary. It's fun. But yeah, great movie.
But it's also quite a bit. It's quite accurate based on the actual lore of the time,
Yeah.
which is what I think
Yes,
is so
it is.
good about it.
Yes, it is for sure. Yeah, and Robert Eggers, he really does his research. Yeah, and The
So let's
Lighthouse
see.
too,
Here's
very
another
accurate
one.
movie.
Another movie one for you. C
Okay.
and L. To what degree do you think the movie Ravenous was inspired by the story of the Donner Party?
Yeah, so Ravenous, as probably some of you know, is my favorite movie of all time, and it is. It's actually more based on the story of Alfred Packer, who I featured in one of my videos. So basically, the screenwriter of Ravenous, I forget the guy's name, but he was reading a book about Alfred Packer, read about how Packer had basically eaten like 5 people out when he was snowed in the Rockies, and then went down to an Indian agency in the spring and lied about it, and then later got in trouble. And so he was reading this book, closed it, and then started writing the script for Ravenous. So I'm sure that and definitely the Donner Party for sure, sort of entered into it. But like, yeah, I mean, as as Carl could tell you as well as I, cannibalism was oddly prevalent in the American West. Maybe not. It's not that odd because it was a frontier society and shall we say nutritionally marginal, especially in the wintertime in the mountains. But yeah, they were eating each other like crazy, man. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, actually, when I was well, I was gonna say when I was in Alaska, I went to the Anchorage museum, a museum in Anchorage, and they had a display of artifacts from the Erebus and the Terror, those British ships that were lost in the ice in the 1840s, and they actually had the bones of some unfortunate souls who had been eaten, and you could see like the knife marks on them and stuff. Yeah, it was great. It was like, oh, where's the dining hall? Yeah, but yeah, it was, yeah, that was fucking awesome. I mean, it wasn't awesome. It was horrible, but it was also really cool.
A fine movie about Alfred Packer is, of course, the from South Park guys, Cannibal the Musical, which is I would
Oh
highly
yeah, I
recommend.
still haven't seen that one actually.
Really, it's
Yeah,
it's pretty good. It's one of their earliest
yeah,
works, and it is, of course, a very serious take on Alfred Packer
yeah,
in a
yeah, yeah.
musical format.
Yeah, without a freaking doubt. Yeah, yeah.
So we got two more. One's we're gonna
Okay.
have one more pretty serious one, and then we're gonna finish off with hopefully a fun one. Sound good?
Okay, awesome. Yep, I'm ready.
I like this one because I like movie questions actually. I think they're so culturally relevant. Forrest S. Does Django Unchained have any historical accuracies besides the flagrant use of racial slurs?
Historical accuracies or
It says
inaccuracies?
historical accuracies, not inaccuracies, accuracies. Now I'll throw
Okay, I
this
got
out
you.
there. Let me start with this if you
Yeah,
don't mind. Django Unchained is an
yeah, no,
interesting
not at
movie
all.
to me because it's really a almost spaghetti western when it comes to the gunfights and the chaotic violence, which is completely unrealistic. Except, except one of the things that Quentin Tarantino wanted to do with Django Unchained, and I think he actually did do, which you don't see in very many films, is he sadly
Hmm.
very accurately represented some of the horrors of slavery.
Yeah,
The chains, the bondage, the cage around the head, the hot boxing by putting them under the ground,
hmm,
all real things that no one talks about. So Django Unchained is an interesting film in that it's kind of a spaghetti western that actually represents some of the brutality of slavery correctly.
yeah, yes. Well, and I think that I think you're right that was specifically intended by him because yeah, there is that one scene where the guy gets torn apart by dogs. I think I haven't seen the movie in a while, but yeah, the rest of it super cartoony. I mean, the blood is like bright orange. It's just like, and of course, people are getting shot with Navy Colts and flying back 10 feet. You know what I mean? It's like it's ridiculous. But yeah, I think for like the dog scene, like you just see like people's reactions to it, and you just like hear it, which I think is very yeah, because there is sort of a distinction between sort of the cartoony violence and the sort of more horrific violence in that movie, which I think was done really really well. One another accuracy I really appreciated was in that movie was Samuel L. Jackson's character. Plays a great villainous role in that movie, and the sort of elderly loyal slave to Leonardo DiCaprio's character, and that was like a pretty common fixture around Southern plantations. Was kind of the hard ass sort of senior slave who was not your friend. You know what I mean? And was very much kind of almost kind of viewed the master as, I mean, in the case of their relationship, as sort of almost a paternalistic relationship. It's sort of like an uncle nephew or a father son relationship between the two of them. Very familial and in its own perverse way, sort of affectionate and loving. And that was that was something that for sure happened like quite a bit, and that I was glad to see included in that movie.
So I think it's an important movie in that regard, as long as you take some of it in context. But when it comes to with the one exception, and I'm actually running out of power on my camera, so we've got to make this relatively quick. But the one thing that I'm not sure, the thing I've not been able, I think is incorrect, is one scene where they show the quote unquote Mandingo fighting. I don't believe that has any historical proof.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know.
But when it comes to the representation of the slavery and a lot of the characters, very realistic. Sadly realistic, totally. which is you watch this and you're like, this can't be real, and sadly it's quite on point.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of movies that's about historical events, I think a good argument would be made that even the crazy violent ones are frankly sanitized.
All right, the last question. It's a fun one. Hopefully I don't run out of power here. Ready for this?
Cool. Yep.
Joshua K. What common New Orleans staple do you miss the most when you're away? For him, it is the ubiquity of cafe au lait. But when I went to school, I thought it was either going to be a muffaletta or a roast beef po' boy. So you live there. Maybe you don't miss it that much. I used to be going there a lot until COVID kicked in. I will tell you what I miss very much. I miss the bomb po' boy from Guys on Magazine Street. I love that freaking po' boy so much. I miss the barbecue shrimp at Mr. B's in the quarter, and I miss the jambalaya supreme at Coop's. Those are three things that come to mind that I miss so much.
Yeah. The jambalaya supreme at Coop's is absolutely amazing. That's. Do you ever go to Verde Mart?
Yes.
My favorite po' boy shop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at Governor Nichols and Royal.
Mm-hmm. I also go to Domelice's for the roast beef po' boys.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think. Well, I mean, I'm certainly. I do live here, but I at least again before COVID, I did like travel quite a bit, and I mean, I think there is a kind of a relaxed nature to life in New Orleans that I always miss when I'm away, and I think it generally. And that's, I think, why I just kind of generally prefer living in the South than in the North. I've never lived in the West, so I couldn't really kind of tell you much about it. But, at the very least, like, California living from my friends who live in California and stuff doesn't really seem like it would gel very much with my personality. But I think that Southern living really does. And just kind of this sort of informal and very relaxed sort of approach to life. I think that there's, and I'm from New England originally, and I love New England. I love Massachusetts. It's a fucking amazing place to live. Certainly compared to, if you compare the quality of life in Massachusetts to Louisiana, sadly, we're sort of a little bit behind in terms of a lot of things. But there's also aspects, my girlfriend just went like that. She's quite Southern. I mean, there is, it's a give and a take, right? I mean, it's like in Massachusetts, you can't, build a shed on your own goddamn property without, 6 months of bureaucracy from the county or whatnot. Not a fan of that. I would love to retire someplace with no zoning laws whatsoever. So, if I want to build, there you go. Exactly. I'll come to Arizona. Perfect. So that's, so that kind of stuff, certainly is preferable. You can build a fire pit in your backyard without whoop, whoop, what you doing there, sir? It's like fucking A, it's like, can I just fucking build a fire pit in my own goddamn backyard? But you know, and I also think there's sort of an aspect of yeah, specifically kind of northern sort of urban life where there's, you know, there's sort of that obsession about kind of career and status, which just is not a thing here. You know, like you will just almost never hear somebody say, you know, oh, what do you do? You know, you just never fucking hear that shit.
I hate that question.
And I know it's so stupid. And you know, and I even thought, you know, once I became a full-time YouTuber, I thought like, oh well, that's a cool thing. I'll have like a good answer to that question. And now I just feel weird and self-conscious about it. You know, people are like, what do you do? I'm a YouTuber. You're a what? You know, it's like I make videos online for, you know, like educational videos. Oh, yeah, I'm like kind of a big deal. I have, you know, 150,000 subscribers. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
People don't give a fuck, you know.
No.
But you know, so nor should they. Nor should they. Yeah. Anyway, I definitely miss that sort of aspect to it. It's just way. It just is much more compatible to just the way that I want to live my life. You know, I do wish that the car insurance were a little less expensive, and I wish, you know, the healthcare were maybe a little bit better. But you know, hey, it's a give and a take. No place is perfect.
The question seemed like I love your answer actually more than a food answer. I kind of went with food because the question seemed.
Oh, was it food? Oh, damn.
No, but I'll throw this out there. No, that's a better answer,
Yeah.
honestly. But I will say this, like, and all the time, like, I wish I was there more often right now with COVID. Hopefully that will change as soon as
Yeah.
we're back to normal. But one of the things I learned over many years of spending lots of time in New Orleans is that I never bothered planning my day anymore. I'd wake up in the morning, and
Yeah.
it would be an amazing, interesting day filled with unique and culturally interesting experiences, meeting interesting
Yeah.
people, and doing cool stuff that I didn't know was going to happen that day. And that's the only city
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
consistently had that experience in every day I've been in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That said, we have done a lot of these questions. We didn't get to them all, and it's not possible to. But what I want to say is I'm super thankful for you coming
Yeah.
here to join me today, and I'm super thankful for the stuff you're putting out on the internet because I love watching it. So thank you for both, and I hope that when I do get back out there, we're going to do something together because I'd love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we can, you know, Beauregard or Lafitte or, you know, something like that could be really cool. And yeah, absolutely, Carl. You know, welcome anytime. You know, and yeah, thank you for having me on. And for those of you watching, you know, you can check out us doing this again with all different questions from my patrons over on my channel. So yeah, come check that out. And yeah.
And I will link to
it's been a blast.
Atun-Shei's.
It's been a blast.
I will link to Atun-Shei's in my video, of course. And if you aren't already there, subscribe to it. I recommend you do so immediately because if you like my historical work, you're going to love his. I'm sure of it. So, and I'm super thankful for this, and I thank you for joining me today. And maybe someday you'll come out here and we'll do some Old West stuff too. That'd be really cool as well.
Yeah, dude, I would love to. I don't get out west enough. Like, yeah, and it's like it's a different world out there. You know, I'm such a east of the Mississippi guy. You know, even now I live on the East Bank. But and yeah, I've could count on one hand the amount of times I've been to, like, you know, the West, the proper West, not, you know, fucking, you know, Seattle or whatever.
Well, we got to get you west of the
yeah.
Pecos then. We'll get you further west.
Yeah, exactly, west of the Pecos with the hanging judge. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love it. So I'd like to thank everyone for
absolutely.
this. And seriously, these are the kind of content creators that YouTube enables and hopefully will continue to empower. So go subscribe, go watch Atun-Shei. And if you're supporting InRange, thank you for making this possible. And thank you for being here. And as always, because the algorithm is not my friend, subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks, guys.
Bye.